Hey guys, welcome back to the Derick podcast. We are in the vault today with a neurologist and a yoga practitioner. This is Luciana Desaibro. Did I say it right?
Yeah.
All right. How's it going?
Good. Good to be here. Yes.
Yeah, I'm glad we were able to put this together. So Mallory with Blue Form, go attend some of your classes with yoga. So that's how this all is connected.
Yes. And I had the pleasure to have Mallory, and she invited me, and I'm delighted. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So when she brought the idea to me, I was like, yeah, let's bring a yoga teacher in. And then she kind of chuckled at me and she said, she's so much more than a yoga teacher. so I think we'll get into, like you had mentioned before we started, a lot of the benefits of yoga. I think you have a lot to bring to the table with your neurology background. I mean, that's been your career.
Right.
Where would you like to start? I mean, do we kind of want to go through a little bit of background, maybe some education history? You're from Brazil. I'm not even sure how far back we go.
Yeah. So I am from Brazil, from the south of Brazil. So not normally, what you think of as Rio and the beautiful beaches, but yes, it is a beautiful country. I've lived back and forth, United States and Brazil. I lived some part of my childhood here. My father is a professor at the university and did his PhD here. And so I spent a lot of my childhood in the south of the United States, in Alabama, particularly Auburn. And I have very fond memories of that. And then went back and eventually went through medical school. Before going to medical school, though, something that brings in the yoga as well, my sister and I have always danced. So we've been ballet and jazz and growing up, right?
Okay.
And I think that brings a lot into, your ability to move and to love movement and to love, doing yoga and teaching yoga. So, and then I had a big time of doing nothing a lot with the body because of medical school and residency. Came back to the States and did my residency in Miami, internal medicine, and then did my neurology residency at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. And so I always lived kind of in the south part. And then my husband's a cardiologist, and so we've kind of always worked together that way. By the way, he enjoys yoga very much and also does yoga. So that was a huge part of my life, and had a family. And so it wasn't until much later, until my second daughter was born about 13 years ago, that I kind of rediscovered movement, rediscovered yoga. And at the same time, I got in contact with a group here in town in St. George, that some ladies that did flamenco dancing, so the Spanish form of southern Spain's folkloric dance called flamenco. Okay. And I started doing flamenco with them, and that was a blast as well. And we did that for many years. It was a small group, and then after my daughter Sophia was born, then I started doing yoga. And enjoyed that very much, because it's not a form of competitive sport. I was never into running, or I played a little bit of volleyball, but was never into doing anything that you sweat too much and you strain too much, right? And so actually for my mental health, right, going through that period of having had a second child and being home and kind of changes in the body, so that to me was very, very important. I remember I was uncomfortable with my own body after the birth of my daughter, and I didn't want to go to any public place. So I got some DVD tapes and I started doing yoga in my house, right? Yeah. And that's how it started. And then when I felt more comfortable, I remember the first times I went to Be Hot. Be Hot was just starting. It was in another place. And I was like, wow, I dig this. I like this, because there is a discipline, there is a breath, there is this systematic kind of growth. It's almost like a dance. And then I did that for many years. I actually practiced yoga for about 10 years, until I decided maybe I can do a little bit more with that. And that was kind of another discovery, right?
Wow, that's awesome. So are you and your husband practicing in St. George now with your career still?
Yes.
Okay.
We both practice. I practice neurology,
Yeah.
outpatient neurology.
Huh.
That's
I
why my
wonder-
classes are in the afternoon, because in the
you're
morning I'm
working?
doing something else. Yes.
I wonder if you guys know my wife works for Warren Butterfield.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So she's the nurse practitioner for him.
Oh, really? I know Dr. Butterfield quite well.
I would say, it's always a
Awesome
small
guy.
world
Yeah,
in the
small
medical
world.
field in St. George. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, I just always think it's funny when people come in the medical field. I'm like, yeah, you may know, and then they
So
tie
she's
it
an
together.
MP? What's her name?
So Amanda Legg.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think yeah.
And so there's, I don't know how much we want to throw in names, but so there's Chrissy Ray. Mm-hmm. She's a PA. Mm-hmm. They just hired Travis Swift, who is a PA, and then my wife's an NP.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, they had I'm going to miss his name. They had a guy that was his mid-level that had moved on, and then Amanda came in. Mm-hmm. And so she's been there a couple years now with him.
And she's very busy, I assume.
She's very busy.
Very busy.
Yeah. Yeah, they're very busy. They do a lot of call. She's like over Christmas, she's taking office calls, and so
there's no weekends. There's no, yeah. And that brings a very important point. Maybe Amanda needs to come and do some yoga.
There you go.
Because
I'm sure she has, because I know she does a lot of different things like that. But
yeah, because it's really, it's a very draining, right, profession, in the sense every time you're dealing with service to other people, particularly sick people. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot from you, and you kind of don't realize that until you get a little bit older, and you feel drained. You feel physically, emotionally drained, right? And so it's important to replenish your body, your mind, and
because there's another side to that. I run a few businesses, and I get physically tired like anyone else, right? But the mentally tired, and there's times. So my unplug is I go up to Cedar Mountain, where we have an acre, and I'll go hang out up there. We'll have a trailer up there, and I kind of just disconnect from everything and just kind of take in, my surroundings, the nature, everything that's going on. And people don't realize, and we have a 1-year-old, the mental strain that everything takes from you. And I think that's a good point. I think that's a good lead in for a lot of the stuff that you can bring to the podcast. So give me a couple things that we can do. I mean, yoga is obviously one of them. You talked about the float tanks before we got on. What are your thoughts on that? What is something that someone can take from this personally and help them replenish that?
Right. I think the biggest one is the one that we are lucky enough to have here, and you just said. I mean, the ability to just open your door and go out in nature, right? To experience nature, to just walk in nature, do what we call a moving meditation, right? So the Tao and the other Eastern cultures, they are very big, and the Buddhists are very big in doing a moving meditation, right? So you're walking in silence, you are listening to the sounds of nature, and you're just absorbing that and breathing and walking one foot in front of the other and looking at, we've all experienced this, when you go on a hike, you look at the moss, you look at the colors, you look at the textures. The more you look, the more you discover, right? And so I think that is a big healer to the mind, right? To all this drain, is going in nature. And the other aspect is moving your body, right? So moving your body is we have lost as human beings this ability to move mindfully. Either we move a lot, doing, marathons and running, and nothing against, or cycling, or doing something more where your adrenaline is kind of pumping, or we do nothing, right? And then we sit on the couch and right? But this thing of being in the middle term, what we call kind of the Goldilocks Rule, right? We've lost a little bit of that as a culture, as a society. We either go too much and then we get hurt, or we don't do anything. And we see that. I see that a lot in my patients. I mean, they can't touch their toes. They can't turn without hurting. And that will come back to bite you, right? When you're in your 20s and 30s, you're fine. You're go, go, go. But
Yeah.
then later on, it goes back to bite you. And I'm just talking about the physical aspect, right? So we talked about nature. We talked about moving in whichever form. Yes, doing things like, meditating or deprivation. We know that our culture is also big in like, blaring music, and we're always on our phones, and lights and artificial lights are always on. We live in an environment where the artificial lights are always on. So a little bit of what we call sensory deprivation is really important, right? Closing your eyes and being in silence and, being in the dark, or have always been part of who we are, as animals. We need that to produce melatonin, to be able to sleep. And so.
Interesting. When you're going through talking some of that, it made me think about some time I've spent in Duck Creek on our property. And I guess I've never put it to a function, but there's times where I'll start a fire and I'll just hang out by the fire, and there's nothing, you can't hear a thing but the fire cracking, and I'll just stare into it. And you realize how many colors are in a fire. You realize the noise it makes. You realize different woods make different noises, and I've really, like, that's allowed me to get to where I'm at, business wise and family wise. And we built a house last year, and I remember, like, I needed that. Like, I needed to go up on the mountain and disconnect and realize those things to re-energize my mind to come back and deal with the things I had to deal with. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's very interesting. I've never really put it that way. Like when you were saying looking at moss, I was just looking at a fire.
Yeah. Isn't it fantastic? Like when you are looking at a fire and you're kind of mesmerized by the fire.
Yeah.
Don't you think, like, millions of years ago, when the species found fire and was able to make fire, and how it changed, the world, and here we are as, these, human beings looking at the fire. And so that is a form of meditation, right?
Yeah,
That is a form of meditation. You're there, you're breathing calmly, you're just like mesmerized and looking at it. So it's like the meditation, what we call awareness, right? You are right there in that moment, enjoying, and you're not thinking of what you need to do or what you just did, or you're just right there. It's you and the fire, and yeah.
Yeah, if I had one thing in my daily life that I'm very bad at, would be just taking in moment by moment. Because, and I think as a business owner, it tends to be that way, where you're always looking ahead. You're looking at the next, I mean, like I have a retail business for one of mine. So you're looking at the next sale, you're looking at the next week, you're looking at last year's to try and compare to what you're doing this year and all your numbers. And it's hard for me to just, like, especially when I get home with my son, and like just live for right now and know that he's not going to be 14 months old again, and really take all of that in. Yes. So yeah, I guess I've never really thought about doing yoga or anything like that, but it's starting to, I've never really had it like connected to how I am. Yeah. I mean, I grew up playing traditional sports. Like you were saying with running a lot, like our punishment was running. And so if you did something wrong, then you ran. Yeah. That's like people that run for fun. I don't get it, because that's how we got punished.
I think I have that same kind of culture. We had to do PE in high school, and I hated to run, right? So it was like always my punishment, and I couldn't understand how people liked to run and did it for. And of course, later on when you start running and you feel the endorphins and you kind of have that hype, you begin to understand. But you can get that same thing or similar in a more moderate type of practice, right? And so in a yoga class and that's the beauty of yoga, right? So it's for everyone, and it can be anywhere, right? The fact that you just kind of bend down and touch your toes and breathe as you come up and down, you're doing yoga, right? It doesn't have to be in a studio. It doesn't have to be we've made it complicated. It doesn't have to be with a mat, right? It's an ancient tradition that started in India, perhaps we think, and it's a philosophy, right? So it's not just, as a matter of fact, it started really with the meditation part, with trying to come out of the body, and it didn't become like these physical postures until much later, right?
Yeah.
So at first was the meditation part. It first was the sitting in stillness and to find something beyond this time and this space and your physical body, right? And all cultures, if you think of that, even Native Americans, and they've all had these ceremonies, these moments, right, where you dance, where you play the drums, where you kind of, use other substances to get out of your physical body, of this space, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting because, the last 10 years of my life's flown by because I've just been so busy and wrapped up into what I'm doing and trying to build.
Right.
And I think that's why it hit me so hard when I started having that time alone. And I don't want to keep taking it back to Duck Creek, but taking it back to just kind of hanging out and reconnecting to myself. And like people will be like, what do you do up here all the time? And I'm like, you're looking at it. I'm like, I sit here next to the fire.
I chop some wood.
Yeah.
Yeah. And no, we have a little property up in Kolob, and we go as much as we can. As a matter of fact, I keep telling my husband, we need to come more. We need to do more. We need to, right? Because you just want to be, and you'll see as you age, as things I was always kind of love to party or love to go places and love to be in places, but now I'm just content to be home and to you start, because you're so busy during the day and during your regular days, that you cherish the time that you are home, that you are with your family, or just having some silence. And
it's a hard thing. I'm 32, and so most of my life has been bombarded with electronics and TV and sports, and it's hard to just stop for a little bit and have that connection. And I think it's just getting worse as generations go on, right?
Right. There is, of course, with social media, and there is this plethora. There's too much information, too many choices, and we can see by our youth that sometimes they get really, really lost, right? And in this personality that is forming itself, 13, 14, 15-year-olds, and you bombard a huge amount of information, and sometimes not good information or credible information. So that's why there's movements. As a matter of fact, in yoga, we have, all kinds of people, from the very young to the very old, people that we have a big subset of people also that have gone through all kinds of problems in life, substance abuse, alcohol, that are, cleansing themselves, that are, finding better habits and something that can sustain them during this period where they, can go through the cravings and go through trying to get out of that addictive situation that they're in, right? And so that, I feel, that's another niche, another important thing for yoga.
Let's turn. I think it's a good segue into kind of the mental health side of what yoga can provide us. So my wife and I would talk about having a kid, and I would tell her I'd be nervous because, I don't know, the world's so crazy. I don't know if I want to bring a kid into this world. And I think it's just getting worse and worse. And a lot of that being the mental health that kids are struggling with every day because of, like you're saying, it's important, like you were getting at, to point out there's a infinity in, information out there, but it's not all correct information. It's just information. And having these kids get attached to it, and having, I'm not schooled in this stuff, but having the hit of, I don't know if it's dopamine or whatever it is, of having someone like your picture or comment on this, or have so many followers. I don't know. I mean, what's your thoughts on that? I'm trying to figure out how to segue this into yoga, but you're probably better at doing that than I am.
Yeah, I think it's huge. I mean, again, if you see it, I have a 13-year-old, right, and I have a 21-year-old, and I can see the difference already in terms of like their engagement in the phone and in social media. My 22-year-old, not very much, and my 13-year-old girl, a lot more, and so as a parent, it's difficult to navigate, but I think, you're young and you have to be optimistic, right? At the same time that there are difficult things and things to navigate, there's just a beauty that we didn't have, right? My generation didn't have the ability to just, with a couple of clicks, you find information, you find connection, you find a group, you find a studio, right? And so there's that. There's the beautiful side of social media, of the ability to connect. I connect with, my people that I graduated with and people that I care, that were my peers and are my peers.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's that good side that we sometimes don't talk enough about, right? But in terms of mental health, I was reviewed. So again, yoga is very vast and it's very fluid, so very versatile. The type of yoga that is practiced mostly in the Western world is called Hatha Yoga. And Hatha Yoga is the yoga where there is the connection of the breath, the movement, and the mind, right? It's called Hatha. And of course, there are other schools and many schools of yoga practice and many schools that give different emphasis on the postures and on the breathing and on the philosophy and on the mind. But in terms of mental health, it is well proven now. There's several very good and important studies that have come out showing that there is a significant benefit of the practice of yoga in terms of mental health. They've studied all kinds of, from monks that perform meditation and some body movements, to patients with cancer, to patients with addictions, to teenagers, to older population. The studies that I was reviewing most recently were with seniors and their ability to improve their memory and cognition and the ability to focus their attention. So there's a lot of benefits, from kids with ADHD to older adults that are struggling with depression, with anxiety, with memory problems, right? So there are studies that show not only the benefits in terms of the patients relating that benefit, but also studies that with MRIs, with functional MRIs, with imaging, that shows that the brain cells and the connections in the brain cells change when you perform these activities on a routine basis.
Wow. I didn't know there was so much science involved in all of it. It's like when you see it from like my eyes, you're just doing different poses, right? And you're breathing a little bit, and then it's like some woo-woo stuff. But there's a lot of science behind it as well. So that's cool to open up. Let's touch on the what's the be hot side of it. So do you guys just crank up the temperature in there? Like, how does that work and why? Is like you were talking to Mallory before we started, it's to build resistance. Is that what you said?
Yeah, so the hot aspect is controversial as well, right? So the majority of the studios and majority of places where you practice are non-heated, right? If you go back to India and the places where it started, some places of India are naturally very hot and humid, right? And so from the times that, the modern founders practiced the yoga asanas, which were the poses. They did that in schools for boys, or they did it in a big open space, and so there was not the element of heat. The element of heat came much later, right? So what we know objectively from the heat is that again, there is a building of resistance. There is a warming of the body. There is like a little cardiovascular component, and we know that it releases, some of the big muscles in the hips and in that part. We know that the heat up to a certain point does open you up. There is a feeling, it's not just the heat, there is heat and humidity, right? So there is this feeling of moisture, of sweating, and of spending more energy, right? So it kind of cranks up a notch of the cardiovascular component, right? But the benefits of yoga, we have plenty of classes that are, I just came back from what we call a restorative class, and so I taught this restorative class, which is non-heated. Most of the poses are sitting down or lying down, and you are just opening and stretching the body with the breath and with a thought. So most of the things are held, the poses are held for a longer period of time. There is breathing, your eyes are closed, so you're more in this meditative state where the thoughts come and go. Where you can really be in that, feeling the sensations of the body. So that's another form. And then we have other forms where, there's heat, there's a lot of people, where the energy is very different, and you're doing more standing poses, and the pose is one breath and one movement, so things are a little bit faster. That's just another form. And then we have, so there's a variety, and that's why it makes it difficult to study, because not every yoga is just yoga, right? Sure. And so it makes it very difficult for you to bring, 120 people and say, okay, how much is too much? How much do you have to get the benefits, right? And what are the benefits? So,
are there different yogas that target different things? And I'm just throwing this out there because I don't know the answer. Like if you're struggling, say you want to gain flexibility, say you want, you have maybe you have a mental health problem. Are there different yoga classes or classifications that'll help with different things, or is it all?
Yes. Yes and no. I mean, yoga is this vast, huge amount of things. But, for example, there are just in the poses part, right? So there's classes that target more the hip areas, the flexibility. There are other classes that target more heart openers and shoulder opening and the spine. And so there's chair yoga for seniors or patients with a disability. There's yoga that focuses entire sessions just on pranayama, which is the breath, right? There's different types of breath. There is yoga recovery, which is a special segment for veterans and for, veterans with PTSD and with all kinds of trauma recovery yoga, it's called. And that's a very beautiful part as well. And it targets really areas where it doesn't have to be war PTSD. It can be post-traumatic stress disorder from trauma, from abuse, from addiction. And so, so there's a lot of applications.
Sure. That's great. Who knew? Who knew? I thought yoga was yoga.
Yoga was just yoga. A bunch of people, yeah.
That's awesome. With your background living and being born in Brazil, does that help you with any of this, or is there any benefit to that? Or I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think I don't know if there's any benefit, but I think living in a culture where there's so much, I'm trying to look back, and there's so much richness in terms of folklore, right? So every part of the country has their different types of dances. It's like here. I mean, this is a big country, and so there's different areas. But because we're more of a tropical country, I mean, there's native dances of this, of that. So I grew up in a culture where there was a lot of movement of the body, and the movement of the body is not considered something shameful or sinful or right, or and so I think that part is also very important. There are other forms of yoga that just bringing back, there's something called Bhuti yoga, and that is a yoga where it's a very fast paced, and there's a lot of movement and shaking and some drumming and just sounds, and so that it's almost like a Native American dance, and there are elements of Native American and Polynesian, and where you let the energy flow, you let it all go, and that's very, very popular. So people like to go to these sessions because in 45 minutes you release a lot of energy, release a lot of trauma, release your day. And some people just love going to restorative and what we call Yin classes. So there's the yin and yang, right? The yang is the more adrenergic, the fast-paced, the hot, and the yin is the calmer, the non-heated, where you hold the postures and work on your ligaments and on your muscles a little bit more, right?
So he's like, dancing around and moving terrifies me. So I don't think that would be for me. So having that background that you're saying, I could understand how that would help you. See, like my wife, she was on the drill team. She was a dancer. So like she would feel comfortable with that. I would not. Yeah. I think I'd be in the back trying to figure out how to get out.
But you don't have to, again, you don't have to do any of those more choreographed classes, even though you'd be surprised. I mean, Mallory's husband,
Blake
loves to do. He goes, and I don't know if he goes just to please her, but I doubt it because he seems to.
It's a good time. I could see him having a good time with it.
He has a good time, and you listen to your body, and you like perhaps say, okay, that looks cool. I'm going to try that, and then you're like, ooh, that didn't feel good, and you back off, right? And remember, the best part is there's no judgment, there's no competition, there's nobody scoring you. Yeah. People are not even looking at you.
Well, and I think that's growing up in a competitive sports family. That's where that sticks out for me. Because I'm like, everyone's watching me, I'm getting judged on this, and I can't move that way. But I'm sure there's none of that going on. It's just all in your head growing up that way.
What did you play?
We did basketball, football, baseball. My dad was a big into baseball, so I have 3 older brothers and a little sister, and all the boys were pushed in every sport. And baseball was a huge focus for my father, and so because he had understood it and he played it, he didn't understand football and basketball as much as far as teaching us how to do it. So we had a lot of baseball where, you messed up on a play and you were judged. I come from a very, how would you say it, sarcastic family. And so there's a lot of getting made fun of. There's a lot of laughing. There's a lot. And it's, if you're not from a family like that, you wouldn't understand it. You just think we're all rude to each other. But we all joke around. But it's put this thing in me where I don't like to be laughed at. I don't like to be made fun of. I don't want to be judged. I don't want all these things. And so it's definitely formed what my personality is today because of those things when I was a kid and being pushed. I had, so my 2 oldest brothers played on the same sports teams. And then my brother that's just older than me and me played on the same team. A lot of times it just cut down how many teams my dad had to coach, right? So he would just make the younger one play up into the older one's age group, where I would play 2 years older, and especially in baseball where I got pushed a lot. I wasn't supposed to be as good as these kids.
Because you weren't their age.
Yeah, I was 10 and they were 12 and 13. And it put a lot of pressure on me to where, circling back to the yoga part of it, I gather all this pressure and I hold it there because I'm scared to be made fun of or laughed at or joked about or whatever. And so I've missed out on a lot of opportunities in my life to do those things because I'm scared of it. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. But it's never too late,
yeah,
right?
Yeah,
you still have a lot of time. And I can tell you that's the majority of, we all had that. I told you, I didn't go into a studio until, I had practiced for a couple of months on my own, and I felt better because you have this, are a very competitive society, right?
Sure.
And sometimes we come from very competitive families. And so we're used to doing, either you do it really well or you just don't bother. And that's another problem, I think, with sports in general,
Yeah.
in youth, right? My son always enjoyed playing soccer. We come from, Brazilians are big soccer players.
Yeah.
And he could never, you either play soccer competitively, and that was, cutthroat,
Mm-hmm.
or you didn't play it at all. There is no medium term. You either are on the drill team or in high school, or you don't do anything, right?
Yeah.
I have a level 8 gymnast that's very competitive, and you either are fabulous in everything or, right, it's very, very competitive. And you can see what that does to the child's psyche. Right? And then it forms this kind of, whereas I'm telling you, you go, nobody's even looking at you, right? But in your mind, you're like so worried, right? And it's not until later on that you learn to like, this is just yoga. Let me breathe and just enjoy this, right? This space and this time. But that doesn't come until later, until all of this self-judgment kind of clears, and it will clear, and it does clear, because you start becoming kinder to yourself and just enjoying it for what it is. And so what if I can't put my foot, behind my head?
Yeah.
And it's not about that, but it takes time, and sometimes our society wants to make it about that. I even heard like they have teams in places where yoga is competitive, and they want to make it a kind of yoga Olympics, and I think it shouldn't be about that, right? It was never, I think, meant to be about that.
Sure.
But
Interesting. Yeah, I tell people all the time, because I talk to a lot of people that are struggling with different things. I'm a very open person. I'm very conversational. And I almost said confrontational. That's not what I meant. And so I have a lot of friends that talk to me, a lot of family talk to me about different things. And I'm always like, you got to cut yourself some slack. Like, there's enough pressure in the world already for you to be compounding that on top of yourself. But I forget often that I also have to cut myself some slack and do that. And I think it's important going through life in general and to be able to disconnect with all of this, no matter how you do it, whether if it's staring at a fire, whether if it's doing yoga, whether if it's taking a minute for yourself and just shutting the lights off. And maybe music helps you, maybe it doesn't, I don't know, just be silent for a minute. And I had a friend, and he actually told the story on the podcast that he was struggling with a lot of things. He had a lot of pressure on him from outside sources and himself. And his solution was to run around the block, and then he took his shoes off, socks off in the grass, and just sat in the grass. And like, I'd never heard of anything like that, but he's like, yeah, it's just called grounding. You're just grounding yourself. And since he's told me that, I've had maybe a dozen people tell me different instances where they've done something similar. And there's a lot of other, again, I'm not versed in this stuff, so I don't want to act like I am, but like, there's a lot of other energies out there that can affect you. And there's so many busy things going on, so many people wanting your attention, you giving your attention to things that don't necessarily benefit you, where I feel like people just need to slow down, take a breath, right?
yeah, I think you touched on a very, very important, if you had talked to me perhaps when I was 10 years into my profession as a physician, right? So you learn the Western ways, and it's black or white. There is no gray. And as you age in your profession and your career, you learn that absolutely it's not that way. And as you said, and I think you put it very well, there are different types of energies and vibrations and resonance out there in this universe that we don't fully comprehend, that we are not meant to comprehend with our five senses, right? And I think as I matured in my profession and became more empathetic, meaning, over the years you age, you have children, you have you have illnesses perhaps, and you become, I said, there's nothing better than being on the other side of the patient bed.
Yeah.
You being a patient, that is one of the most humbling things for a physician. And there are several lessons that you can learn from that. And so bringing that back to yoga, I think things don't, as I told you, first I had my profession and my career, and then I opened into this second thing, which was initially a hobby. And
Sure.
but things don't open up until you are ready for them, right? And we believe that very much in kind of this, the student and the teacher will show when the student is ready. And so it's this kind of energy that before I wasn't ready to accept and to comprehend into, and now you understand and you're more benevolent with yourself and with other things. You become more empathetic, you become kinder, I think you become more understanding. And that brings a segment into not only mental health, but physical health, right? Once you start doing or being in a practice, whatever it is, and whatever physical activity, if you're a big runner or if you're a big cyclist, right? Automatically with time, and with yoga the same thing, you start refusing things that no longer serve you. And that goes from simple things like greasy foods or, I don't know, a bunch of fast foods or TV shows that really add nothing to your life, or scrolling on Instagram, things that really add nothing, that you're wasting your energy on those things. So your habits start becoming simpler, and I think I won't say better, just different, right? Things that used to matter a lot to you, like having a brand new big old truck, right? Doesn't matter all that much anymore because your priorities have changed, right? So you start, it changes, it infiltrates all aspects of your life, as it should, right? Not become an obsession or something that you do, but something to guide your life.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time. We have 15 minutes left. Maybe I'll kind of just, I feel like I shouldn't even be talking because you have so much to share. And so I don't want to take up any of the time. And so I'm trying to not get down rabbit holes and talk too much. Maybe, is there a couple exercises or something that we could just talk about on here? Maybe some breathing exercises. I'll share one quick one that I've done that's helped me a few times. When my genealogy is very riddled with anxiety and depression and a lot of these things. I've talked about it multiple times. My dad committed suicide on here, and a lot of that was from depression and anxiety. And Tony Robbins had one where he just feels your heart. You just stop, turn lights off, whatever, and you feel your heart and just start breathing. And you can actually feel your breath and your heart almost sink. And it just kind of stops everything out and helps me refocus. Is there anything like that you like to share or anything?
So there's several. That's a big one. This other one that you talked about, taking your shoes off and putting many parts of your body onto the earth is a big one, right? So laying on grass, laying on the earth, just putting your feet on the earth, walking in the grass, walking in different types of terrain, right? So the sand and gravel and all of that is a meditation while you're doing that, feeling your body very close to the earth. Sitting in a cross-legged position, right? Sometimes it's difficult is very important also than just touching your fingers onto the earth. There's another one very similar to what you said. Left hand comes to the heart, right hand comes to the belly, and you feel that ebb and flow of the breath, breathing through the nose and breathing out also through the nose is what we call ujjayi breath. It's one of the forms of breath and you feel almost like a humming sensation in the back of your throat. That's very calming. And if you do that enough, it just puts you into a sleep, into a meditative state. Very important to have like some sensory deprivation. So I learned to meditate and started meditating much later. I didn't really think that I was going to benefit, but it is incredible, and meditation is a part of the yoga. It's one of the limbs of yoga, the 8 limbs of yoga. And meditation, which is nothing complicated, is basically just shutting the lights, sitting in the corner of your room or laying down and just breathing and being there. It is incredible how much sharper, how much clearer your thoughts. First, there's a race of thoughts, right? And first there's that to-do list and that race of thoughts. But if you just keep coming back to the breath and just breathing, there is a moment where things kind of dissolve. And if you do it enough, it doesn't have to be, a long period of time, and you can find your own way. It just makes everything clear. That's the word that I can use. I think clear. Your decisions are clear. Your ability
sharper, like you said.
Right.
Yeah.
Your ability to say, wait a minute. No. There is that, because we act so much on impulse. Somebody says something to you, or you see some numbers on your balance in your business, and you just react. So it teaches you that there's that split second between, your answer and that is very important, and you are able to make better decisions. You act less on impulse and more on, your will.
Yeah.
And again, just being in nature is a huge one. Breath is a huge one. Social deprivation or kind of is really also an important part. And if you have, more of a mystical or a religious or something of a higher power or a different energy, that's also important to tap into, because that brings you a different dimension. So we all have our struggles. It's a process, right? It's not like, okay, I'm going to read this book and tomorrow I'm going to start doing everything that it says here, right? We very much, just like the magic pill, we want that magic solution.
Go to one yoga class and I'm going to be twice as productive tomorrow.
Right, exactly. No, you're probably going to be very sore tomorrow, to tell you the truth. But, that's the beauty. And so just to cite the example, for example, my husband is very busy. He's an interventional cardiologist. He works all day with a leather, a lead suit, right? Because they're in the cath lab and all. And he found that over the years, you start becoming hunched over, and all the sports that we do, cycling, walking, running, we're hunched over, right? And so when you go to and he doesn't like any of the, more strenuous classes. He just loves to do his stretch and and it has benefited him tremendously, the breath. Again, big time, anxiety and perfectionism, and we all are, right? We wouldn't be doing what we're doing, business people and physicians. We have to be very detail oriented. But it is kind of our escape. And the word is not escape. It's just another side of things.
Clarity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Clarity.
Yeah, I've tried the whole stop and think and try and slow down, and my thing was always picture black. And I had no instruction on how to do any of this, right? I was just laying in my bed one day and I was like, just picture black, just picture nothing. And then my mind starts going and I'm like, well, black is something, and then you're saying you just start getting these races of thoughts coming through. And I would tell anyone that wants to try any of this, like, that's okay. I think that's fairly normal. But it's kind of keep breathing, keep focusing, and kind of get past that. And that's where I think some of the benefits would go. I mean, I wouldn't say that I've ever meditated, but it sounds like I have. I just was unaware I was doing it.
Yeah, by the fire.
Yeah,
right
there,
by watching the fire up in Duck Creek.
Yeah. I've spent a lot of time staring at fires up there.
and I would say, keep doing that, and bring your young son, right? Bring him to do that and to enjoy those kind of things. And because it really is a time away from all this comparativeness, all
Yeah.
this running in society, right? And of course, you have to have, some financial security and stability, and I'm not,
Sure.
I'm not taking any of that away. We all have done that, and there's a period of your life, which is the one that you're in right now, that you need to build your nest, and it looks like you're doing it just fine. Thank you.
I'm
right?
trying.
And but again, there will be periods of time where you feel depleted,
Right.
physically, mentally, emotionally, that you just need to stop for a little. And it doesn't have to be anything. Some people think, oh, okay, I'm going to take this whole month and go to Costa Rica and detox. And that's all nice and beautiful and great that you can do that. But it can be much simpler than that, right? A couple of hours and in your own home, and just awareness. And there are several easy kind of small meditative exercises. You did the black one. There's also one where you breathe and you imagine a square, and you breathe the upper part of the square, and then all the four corners of the square, and you keep breathing. And
Interesting.
that's another
Just a simple one you can sit down and do.
It's
Or
called square
stand up
breath.
and do.
Yeah, it's stand up and walk and do. And I was listening to another day a podcast from actually I think it was a TED Talk on a Buddhist monk that was talking about walking meditation. What kind of, as you're walking, as you're watching nature, what kind of questions are you asking yourself? Who am I? And it's what you said. You said, oh, I have this genealogy of like mental illness.
Yeah.
And right. But then again, you think, okay, I'm much more than that. That doesn't, my genes do not define
Exactly.
me, right? I don't have to go down this same path. At the same time that these generations that I know, my father and my past generations, were very resilient and were, right? So just knowing that we're from a bigger cosmos, and we're all related, and those kind of things are very, very powerful to ask a couple of these questions with compassion, right? Because we're the first ones to beat ourselves up a lot. And so.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying. I hadn't really ever looked at it like that, but I've always decided when, so my father and I, we kind of severed our relationship a few years before he had committed suicide. I hadn't talked to him for 4 or 5 years probably. But that was a thing for me that I felt like I had to do, because I felt like there was just so much negativity surrounding it, and our relationship was very, it became very contentious, and I just thought, okay, like I'm not going to let this bring me down in my life. I need to grow, I need to build, I need to do these things. And having to be like the caretaker of my father at the time, I just couldn't do it anymore.
Right.
And so when you said that, like I can disconnect from that, and I kind of feel like I'm starting my own
genealogy.
My own fork off of that. Like I still am who I am, and I had a great father for a long time. Depression just kind of got hold of him strong, and he just kind of mentally went downhill fast. And so, but I remember that, coaching sports, being around, trying to support us, he worked a lot trying to support 5 kids. And so, but that end part anyway, I'm trying to kind of fork off and show my son, hey, you can do these things, but there's also competitive sports aren't everything, making the NFL is not everything. And that's what was pushed on us. And so I like to bring people on like yourself, and kind of, when you're talking, a lot of what you're telling me is how can I benefit myself, but how can I pass that along to my son as well?
Right.
And so when you said, share Duck Creek with him and the fires with him, and I don't know, it just kind of hit me when you said that.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you saying that. I appreciate you sharing everything. I think we should just wrap it up. We only got a couple minutes. If there's anything else you want to say before we cut this, I mean, we've shared quite a bit.
Yeah, I think it was, hopefully it was productive to everyone. I think think the message is keep an open mind, right? Keep an open mind and know that within yourself, you have the power to change and to make different, decisions. So maybe I'm going to try something different. Maybe I will try a yoga class. Maybe I will bring my mental health and my well-being into my own responsibility.
Yes.
So as a physician, I see this a lot as well. It's like, okay, I want the magic pill. I want the magic cure. I want somebody to tell me what the name of this thing is. And there might not really even be a name. And bring it to your own responsibility. Okay, I feel this way. I know that this is this way. How can I branch out and, work and get these things going?
And it's a change. It's a change that you have to make for yourself and a direction that's positive as well.
Absolutely.
So, well, I would love to have you on again. I think this was great.
Yeah.
So if people want to come to yoga, what classes do you teach? Do you have a set schedule? How does that work?
So all the classes are beautiful. We have very talented teachers. There's classes in meditation. For example, the owner, Joshua, has a meditation class. All the classes are infused with some kind of positive affirmation in the beginning and something for you to kind of chew on as you're doing your poses. Start with, the foundation. Start with perhaps a more restorative yin class, non-heated. And then if you want to try something, fun and go to the heated and more, power classes, we also have those. But more important than even that is just try some form of yoga, of breathing, of meditation, of moving your body kind of on your own. Uniting the mind, the body, and the breath is the essence.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, hey guys, this has been a great episode. This was episode number 27. So we're moving right along. The holidays got us a little turned around, but we're still bringing stuff to you pretty much every week. Thank you for being on. Thank you for giving us, you've been about an hour and a half with what we talked about before we sat down. So I really appreciate your time. And we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks guys. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.